Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Soulful Side of Life with me, Portee. I hope that you're well and having a good week. So, if you watched the first episode, it was just an intro into how I got into fashion contributing, lifestyle reporting, and how I think if this is something that you're interested in doing, to go for trying to contribute to the big, well-known magazines out there. But if you take that route, to do your own thing as well, to launch your own reportage on your own YouTube, Substack, or Spotify podcast channel, because it just gives you more options that if something were to ever happen that you're not contributing to a larger publication any longer, that you've got your own thing going and you can continue moving without much gut-wrenching hurt or surprise if a larger publication is not able to keep you on. So today I want to talk about learning as you go, because I did not major in journalism. I did not do any sort of much lifestyle reading growing up. My interest was in politics and civil service. That was the mindset that I had growing up. I stumbled into lifestyle and into fashion. And so today's episode is going to focus on learning as you go, especially if your life journey is like me, where you stumble into journalism or you stumble into reporting on lifestyle fashion topics. So if this sounds like something that you're interested, then stick around.
It's Tired Tunes on the track.
Of UAE.
Okay, so in 2019, I started doing fashion reporting, writing about Lebanese designers, because I had uh, moved to Lebanon a year before to help and serve Syrian refugees. And I needed some income and I wanted something fun to do on the side. So, as my serving of Syrian refugees, as that work was kind of waning or plateauing, I wanted something else to do. So I simply just reached out to the then editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar Arabia and started covering Lebanese designers. And so where do you start when you've been commissioned to do an article in an area that you've never worked in before, in an area that you know nothing about? Like, the most I knew about fashion is that Chanel was pronounced Chanel, Dior was pronounced Dior, and that there's certain things as fashion shows that happen in Paris and London and New York, and that was about it. I had heard of a few fashion brands, but I couldn't tell you anything about fashion. So where do you go when you know that this area interests you and that you would perhaps like to have a spot in it writing about brands, but you don't know anything? Well, what simply starts is, for me, is that I just did some basic reporting, easy reporting on fashion pop-ups and events that I found about that was happening in Beirut. And I simply just went, got quotes from the founders, reported on the setup of the pop-up. This is who arrived. This is the kind of looks that are there, what inspired the creative directors, the founders to create a capsule collection, or if they're just selling clothes that have already been designed, what inspired the looks, how long did it take to create the collection. the textiles that were used to tell that sartorial story, that's where I started, just simply reporting on what I was seeing at fashion events in the city. But then came a couple of months later that I found myself in Florence, Italy for Pitti Uomo. And that had a really big impact on me in fashion because it was there that I began to see fashion in a much larger view than Lebanese designers. And what I mean by that, the first thing that I went to cover and write about and see was an exhibition that was happening at Salvatore Ferragamo, where I was just simply reporting on that exhibition. And being able to be taken on a tour of that was very helpful by the guide because she explained to me the history of the brand and how Mr. Ferragamo had lived in the US and got skills as a shoemaker and how he took that knowledge back to Italy when he returned to create his own business and how he created different styles and shoes for Hollywood movie stars and the various collections and and because I'm a history major, I think people who love and appreciate history will listen to these kinds of guides and tours with a unique ear because since I was a child, I was able to take dates and events that happened in history and just absorb that. And so there's history in fashion. And so that it was where I was and how I was drawn in to the industry. And then from there, because I was initially in Florence to attend Triple R's presentation. And Triple R is a brand that was started by Roberto Cavalli, and Ava Cavalli's son. And I'd never heard of Pitti Uomo. I didn't know that it was a men's fashion week. I didn't find out till, I don't know how awful to admit this on video, but I didn't find out till like a couple of years later that Uomo meant men and that it was a men's fashion week. Even when I was there, that wasn't made clear to me. But I think how I found out about the Triple R presentation that was happening is that my editor at Harper's Bazaar Arabia had forwarded an email to me, and I had reached out to the PR to ask if they were providing travel arrangements for media, and he said no. And so it was actually a friend of mine in Dubai who was visiting me in Paris. And I'm like, I really want to go to this Pitti Uomo show, but I don't have the budget. And he's like, well, from Paris to um, Florence, it's not that much. And he was very kind and paid for the flight to Florence. And I'm forever grateful for that. And yeah, so I went to that exhibition for Salvatore Ferragamo. And then there was one day I went to a Gucci garden and got a similar tour and a guided walk through that exhibition and that exhibit that was happening. And I found out things that I didn't know about Gucci. And I had known that Tom Ford, I hadn't heard the name Tom Ford, but I didn't even know that he had been creative director of Gucci. And just finding out that knowledge, I was learning as I go and hearing about how he transformed and turned the brand around with his sensual aesthetics of his style was just noteworthy and fascinating. And then that evening, I went to the Salvatore Ferragamo runway show, and that was my first ever runway show that I had ever been to. And I was amazed because, this was a fashion show that what I remember when I was like 5, I went to a fashion show that my aunt had been in at the Embassy Suites in my hometown. And I'd never seen, since that young age, I'd never been to another live runway show. But this was a runway show done by a brand that was well established and it was done with quality. And I was just amazed. And I was one of the first people that arrived, and when I sat at my seat, I was like an hour early and I was just taking it all in. And a woman sat beside me, an Italian woman, and we got to know each other. And just having a conversation with her where she explained how Italy had always been a country that supported artisans and the arts, and local regional princes around Italy and wealthy families like the Medicis, who come from Florence, had funded the arts, and how Florence is known for its leather making. And she was explaining and going on about Roberto Cavalli and how he had come from a leather making family and his design style. And I was just amazed and taking it all in. And then I sat, guy sat next to me, had taken his seat next to me. And then one of his friends arrived and they got to talking, and his friend scooched in. We made space for his friend. And that friend happened to be Ugo Mosey, who went on in his own professional fashion endeavors, and he works for fashion or worked for a fashion brand in Italy. And since, that moment had styled for well-known music artists. And then now he has his own accessories brand that uplifts Africa and specifically Nigeria. Just and later on that evening, I saw Ugo and that guy again, and we just had a larger conversation at R- Robert Cavalli's after party at their house in Florence. And it was just cool being able to make these connections. And there I was learning as I went, because I had no knowledge of fashion, of the fashion industry 6 months before that. And being thrown into this in such a fun and unique way and meeting fascinating people. And really, fashion is a small world. And that's why you have to be careful how you treat people. And I'd come out of DC, and it's the same mentality. Washington is a small town, a small village where everybody knows everybody, and you have to be careful what you say and how you navigate because people know each other. And it's the same with fashion. And so I had also gone to Robert Cavalli's house for the presentation to see his collection. And just, it was amazing going because the way his mother had decorated the house with strong print designs, and the tablecloths, leopard tablecloths, and flamboyant candelabras on the tables, and just the food presentation of these giant mozzarella balls and tomatoes and peppers and sliced cold cuts of prosciuttos and salamis, and just how Ava has her own eye for home interiors and setting up the space for her son's presentation. I took all of that, and I had a chat with one of his friends where I heard the word sartorial for the first time. I'd never heard, or if I had heard the word, I never looked it up to find out what it meant. And that was just, I was taking it all in. And then I went from Pitti Uomo June 2019 to the next month to Haute Couture Week in Paris, and going to Rami Kadi's show and Zuhair Murad and Tony Ward and Ali Saab and the Lebanese brands, and seeing the craftsmanship of the beadwork and the sequin work. And it was just all fascinating to me. And being able to sit front row and cover for Harper's Bazaar Arabia was just a blessing and an honor. And I soaked every minute of it up, covering and learning as I go, describing what I was seeing, going backstage to get some quotes from the creative directors. It was just all so eye-opening for me, meeting George Chatra behind stage and knowing that his brand had been featured in the first Devil Wears Prada. I was smitten. And then from there, another way and another thing that helped me learn as I went, I'm a networker and I'm all about relationship and sitting down and getting to know people. And I was living in Lebanon at the time, and I made it a point to go to every well-known Lebanese atelier. And the first designer's atelier that I went to was Ronnie Zakim in Senefiel. And he was ever gracious, and he and his PR welcomed me, and I sat down and had a chat with him, and just learning about his craft and his style was memorable. I also went to Zuhair Murad's atelier. I went to Ali Saab, Azzy and Osta. Who else? George Chatra, Rami Kadi. I went and sat down and chatted with him. Yeah, so I made it a point, and that helped me also. One, get to know Tony Ward as well. Cannot forget about Tony Ward. He's the funniest of Lebanese couture designers, and just a hoot to be around. And he always just shows such hospitality when I visit his office in Paris or in Beirut. But going and sitting down and meeting these designers in their ateliers, walking through the ateliers, seeing the beadwork being done, seeing the craftsmanship being done was also eye-opening, because there I was learning as I went. And so that is very helpful when you start forming relationships with the brands, that if you can go to their workshops and meet the creative directors and sit down with them and find out, what makes them unique from their colleagues, it really makes a difference because you learn as you go. Also, what helps is sitting under the wisdom of some of the best people who know fashion like the back of their hand. And I admire the mind and the writing and the work and the passion of Susie Menkes. She's going strong. I still see her at every fashion week. Milan, Paris, Venice Film Festival, with the Armani Beauty brand. She is there, and she has a wealth of knowledge, years of knowledge built up. And I've had a couple of chats with her, and you cannot, I would say, you cannot be a fashion contributor without educating yourself on the fashion basics and some elements of history within fashion, because you can't, I would say, you can't continue just doing reporting like, this is what I see. I mean, you can, that this textile was used. This is the color palette of the collection. But if you want your writing to go deeper, you've got to go in and find out historical elements and bits about fashion, about the industry, about, the collection. If it's a collection about war, Alexander McQueen did a collection, one of his noteworthy collections on the conflict between England and Scotland, and there was a certain war that inspired that collection. And if you don't read the press notes, the press release, and then you see, okay, it's about this, then you need to go and look up, okay, what happened in that conflict, when that was, and then how that translates to the collection. That would make the article much more richer and deeper when you give historical context and depth instead of just doing basic reportage. So, sitting under the wisdom of people like Susie, who also can give a deeper understanding of a brand and of a designer and of their sartorial staff, the sartorial style, does help. I love watching the Understitch channel on YouTube. The lady who does that channel is amazing. She also has a channel on beauty. So I can't stress enough how much one should go and watch her. And there's other YouTubers out there who also give historical background and deeper insights into brands. And that's a great place to start. If you find yourself stumbling in to fashion, that's a good place. These are good resources to start with. I also love Vanessa Friedman's writings at the New York Times. She does excellent analysis and critique of fashion. She's a really big resource. Also, the Fashion Roadman, his wealth of knowledge of designers and brands, and he touches on the history of elements of fashion. He knows his stuff, and he started from zero. And he created some of the most helpful and thought-provoking fashion critiquing videos out there. So these are really great resources and places to start. The last thing I'll say is as you go, and this is why it's important to just start. So if you've got a passion of writing and you feel like this is my place, this is what I can offer the world and offer in the fashion industry, is being a fashion contributor. Well, as you go and as you network, you're going to be invited to things. You're going to be invited to museum exhibitions, to presentations, to fashion shows, to dinners, you're going to be invited to various things, and you're going to learn as you go. You're going to find yourself sitting beside somebody at a fashion week, and you're going to learn things as you delve into conversation with them. Just last September Paris Fashion Week, there were the whispers, who's gonna come into Chanel, who's gonna come into Dior, because people knew that Maria Grazia Curie was on her way out. And I sat next to a guy and he's like, oh, it's gonna be J.W. Anderson. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Yeah. And it turned out to be true. You find things out that you don't know when you go to these events. So I think it's important that you be a sociable person when you're in the fashion industry, and you be somebody who's constantly and continuously curious to find out about things. So I hope that this is helpful. Um, the only thing that you can do when you are thrust into fashion is that you're going to learn as you go. And the only thing that you can do is you just jump in and you just start. And that means when you see a fashion week, you go. If find the money and sometimes you've got to fund these things yourself. Most of the things that I go to and cover, I fund myself. And that takes a different kind of, I would say, mindset and way that you think about navigating through the fashion spaces. Money is not in fashion, really. I mean, there's things you can do to make money in fashion, but overall, on average, it's just not, especially as a fashion contributor, there's not really money in it. So you've got to find other ways to monetize. I should do a video on that, of just, you can't rely on contributing to publications as stable income in fashion. You just can't. So then you have to think of other creative ways, other platforms that you can share your ideas of what's happening in fashion, and create your own businesses or consulting, things like that within the industry. But just jump in, just go, just do it. Spend money to go to a show or a fashion week nearby. You're going to meet people. You're going to learn things that you didn't know before. Interest compounds. Before you know it, you're going to be going from A to B to Z, and you're going to grow as you go. You're going to learn as you go. So don't be afraid to learn as you go. And learning as you go means you've got to be curious and stay curious, because it's going to lead you to some amazing opportunities within the fashion industry. So until the next video episode, God bless you and go bless somebody else. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.